Duanling Tian, whose cultivation had broken through and who had comprehended the triple high-grade wind concept, moved like a flash of lightning, with the heaven and earth phenomenon above his head following him like a shadow. As Duanling, Tian's feet rolled with a yellowish-brown power, as if resonating with the earth. He took a step, and had already passed through several caves. Around the yellowish-brown power, in addition to wisps of rampant purple lightning, there were also solid azure gales intertwined, following him like a shadow. Not only that, but as Duanling Tian swept forward, a layer of qi subtly explored ahead of him. Upon closer inspection, it was a solid, sword-shaped qi. Above the void where Duanling Tian was flying, countless ancient horned dragon phantoms followed him, moving with formidable momentum. Because of the extreme speed, it was difficult to clearly see how many ancient horned dragon phantoms there were. As soon as Duanling Tian stopped, the heaven and earth phenomenon above his head would be fully revealed, showing a total of 1,150 ancient horned dragon phantoms. Third-level void transformation stage cultivator, with all his elemental energy unleashed, was comparable to the power of 400 ancient horned dragons. The triple high-grade wind concept was also comparable to the power of 400 ancient horned dragons. The other three ninth-level void cave concepts combined were comparable to the power of 300 ancient horned dragons. Altogether, that was the power of 1,100 ancient horned dragons. As for the extra 50 ancient horned dragon powers, they were the power of earth that Duanling Tian borrowed by resonating with the earth using his earth concept, which was half the power of the earth concept itself, propelled. By the power of 1,150 ancient horned dragons, Duanling Tian was as swift as wind and as fast as lightning. His speed was so great that many martial artists could not clearly see his movements. After an unknown period, Duanling Tian stopped, his expression somewhat grim. Shenwei, looking at the corpse lying on the ground, Duanling Tian's eyes showed a chilling, predatory glint. Shenwei was not unfamiliar to him. In fact, he had known Shenwei even before he joined the Five-Element sect. Although his first meeting with Shenwei was unpleasant, it was due to Shenwei being deceived by his own younger brother. Shenwei himself, however, was someone he got along with well. Before entering the Martial Emperor's secret treasure, Shenwei was a lively person. Now he had turned into a cold corpse, and he had clearly been dead for many days. Bang! At some point, Duanling Tian, with a gloomy expression, stomped his foot on the ground. Rumble, rumble! Immediately, a hideous crack opened in the ground, where Duanling Tian had landed, extending all the way under Shenwei's corpse, causing Shenwei's corpse to fall in. As Duanling Tian raised his hand, elemental energy fused with the power of earth, surged, hitting the side of the cave wall. Stone chips flew, accompanied by some falling gravel. Whoosh! Duanling Tian raised his hand again. The stone chips and gravel were pulled by his power, filling the crack where Shenwei was buried, allowing Shenwei to rest peacefully underground. Rest in peace. Looking down at the filled crack, Duanling Tian murmured to himself, "What is he doing? I arrived earlier and just saw it. He seems to be burying someone's corpse. It must be a fellow disciple he was close to." At some point, the commotion caused by Duanling Tian attracted many onlookers. These people stood in the distance, whispering. Duanling Tian frowned and was about to leave. "It's Duanling Tian." Two people who had just entered the cave and joined the onlookers couldn't help but exclaim when they saw Duanling Tian. Duanling Tian heard the sound and looked over. With just one glance, he recognized the two, who were two secular disciples from Yunkong Temple. Although he didn't know them personally, he had some impression of them. Duanling Tian nodded at the two. It was a kind of fate to meet here, coming from the same entrance. After nodding and greeting the two, Duanling Tian was about to leave again. However, before he could move, he found himself surrounded by three figures who shot out like lightning. After surrounding him, their eyes glowed, and they stared at him with greedy expressions, as if he were some rare treasure. "You are Duanling Tian?" The #1 young generation talent of the Five-Element sect in the region east. "Of Northern Desert, I heard you obtained an insight fragment?" After the three surrounded Duanling Tian, they spoke one after another, their breathing becoming rapid between their words. "Right. How could I forget? Duanling Tian, Duanling Tian. Some time ago, I heard people say he obtained an insight fragment. I also heard. Duanling Tian, the #1 young generation talent of the Five-Element sect, recently obtained an insight fragment. So he is that Duanling Tian." For a moment, except for the slight change in expression of the two secular disciples from Yunkong Temple, all the other onlookers stared at Duanling Tian with covetous eyes, wishing they could kill him directly and seize the insight fragment in his hand. Duanling Tian heard the discussions around him, frowned, and immediately looked at the two secular disciples from Yunkong Temple. Immediately, the two secular disciples from Yunkong Temple's expressions changed drastically, and they hastily shook their heads, saying, Duanling Tian, I didn't know about you obtaining the insight fragment. That's right. If we had known that the news of you obtaining the insight fragment had spread, we definitely wouldn't have exposed your identity just now. The two secular disciples from Yunkong Temple spoke with some panic. They had witnessed Duanling Tian's strength. If Duanling Tian wished, he could kill both of them in just one encounter. Duanling Tian's frown deepened. He wasn't blaming the two secular disciples from Yunkong Temple for exposing his identity, but rather wondering why others would know about him obtaining the insight fragment. Most importantly, these people, besides not having seen him before, all knew his name and his origins. When I obtained that 7th level Imperial Realm Earth insight fragment back then, I specifically extended my spiritual force to probe the surroundings. Besides me, absolutely no other living person knew that I had obtained the insight fragment. Duanling Tian recalled the scenes of obtaining the 7th level Imperial Realm Earth insight fragment, and was absolutely certain of this. Absolutely no other living person knew about him obtaining the insight fragment. Then, there was only one possibility. Someone is deliberately framing me, intending to make me a public enemy of the group of young powerhouses who entered the Martial Emperor's secret treasure. This is trying to kill me. With a thought, Duanling Tian easily confirmed this point. After confirming it, a hint of blood red appeared in his eyes. For a moment, anger surged in his heart. What he wanted to do most now was to find the person who spread the rumor and kill him. Although he wasn't worried about the impact of this rumor on him, the fact that the other party was secretly plotting against him like this made him very unhappy. Coming back to his senses, Duanling Tian noticed again, besides the two secular disciples from Yunkong Temple standing in the distance, trembling with fear because of him, in addition to the 3 who initially surrounded him. Another 4 also came closer. 7 people surrounded him. At this point, Duanling Tian also realized, besides the first 3 being together, among the other 4, they were also divided into 2 small groups, each with 2 people. In other words, these 7 people came from 3 different forces. A total of 6 major forces entered through entrance number 2. Aside from the 20 disciples of Kanglang Fort, who all died at his hands, he had some impression of the people from the other 5 major forces, even if he didn't know them personally, but he had no impression of the 7 people in front of him. Are you disciples of Wuchang Sect, Chuyun Sect, and Beiming Sect? Facing the 7 young powerhouses whose elemental energy was surging, with their concepts following them like shadows, ready to attack him at any moment, Duanling Tian's eyes narrowed, and he asked in a deep voice, That's right. What? Scared? Hearing Duanling Tian's words, several young powerhouses surrounding Duanling Tian showed smug smiles on their faces. Facing disciples from a third-rate force like the 5-element sect, as disciples of a second-rate force, they had an invisible sense of superiority. It seems that this Martial Emperor's secret treasure likely only has 2 entrances. The people from Wuchang Sect, Chuyun Sect, and Beiming Sect all came from entrance number 1, and I and the remaining people came from entrance number 2. So far, I haven't encountered anyone from a 3rd entrance, Duanling Tian muttered to himself, subtly confirming this point. Who are the Wuchang Sect disciples? Facing the encirclement of the 7, Duanling Tian showed no fear, slowly opening his mouth to ask. At this moment, Duanling Tian's gaze was calm, his face serene, unperturbed, even if Mount Tai were to crumble before him. We are Wuchang, sect disciples. As soon as Duanling Tian finished speaking, a young man and a young woman replied indifferently. The young man had a cold expression, staring at Duanling Tian with greedy eyes. The young woman's face was calm, showing no signs of joy or anger. For the sake of my acquaintance with Peng Bao, you 2 may withdraw. Duanling Tian glanced at the 2 Wuchang sect disciples indifferently, his tone calm, without any emotion. Peng Bao was the Wuchang sect disciple he had encountered before, a 3rd-level void transformation stage cultivator with extraordinary strength. That time, he and Peng Bao had only engaged in a mutually beneficial transaction, a mere fleeting acquaintance, but he had a good impression of Peng Bao's straightforwardness. Now, knowing that the 2 in front of him were Wuchang sect disciples, he thought of Peng Bao, and thus was willing to spare their lives. Otherwise, he would never have wasted his breath. You know senior brother Peng Bao? The Wuchang sect female disciple, who had been calm all along, couldn't help but exclaim, softly, I do. Duanling Tian nodded. The Wuchang sect female disciple nodded upon hearing this and stepped back, saying, Senior brother Peng Bao saved my life. Since you are his friend, today I will not trouble you. So what if you know, senior brother Peng Bao? I'm determined to have the insight fragment on you. The other Wuchang sect male disciple, however, showed no appreciation. However, Duanling Tian seemed to have completely ignored the male disciple from Wuchang sect. He narrowed his eyes and surveyed the 6 people surrounding him, then said indifferently, "You 6, come at me together." Hearing Duanling Tian's words and seeing the disdain on his face, the 6 young powerhouses from second-rate forces had a drastic change in expression, each of them thoroughly enraged. A disciple from a third-rate force dared to openly challenge 6 disciples from second-rate forces. This was provocation. It was blatant provocation. "Since you wish to die, we shall grant your wish. We'll let you know that a third-rate force disciple like you is nothing more than an ant in the eyes of us second-rate force disciples. Killing you is as easy as slaughtering a chicken or cutting grass." The 6 disciples from second-rate forces attacked almost simultaneously, charging towards Duanling Tian. Their elemental energy surged, their concepts followed like shadows, and their spirit weapons were unleashed without reservation, striking fiercely at Duanling Tian. Above, the void above their heads, hundreds of ancient horned dragon phantoms materialized, accompanying them as they lunged at Duanling Tian, who was surrounded in the middle. More than 3,000 ancient horned dragon phantoms formed a circle, baring their fangs and claws. As they pounced towards Duanling Tian's location, boom, 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 boom. The full force attacks of the 6 second-rate force disciples caused the airflow in the air to rapidly compress, then setting off bursts of thunderous air explosions. As the air explosion sounded, vast waves of energy swept out in all directions, turning into gusts of wind that made the robes of everyone present flutter and crackle. Kill! The spirit weapons in the hands of the 6 second-rate force disciples at this moment seemed to transform into scythes of death, directly targeting Duanling Tian, intent on taking his life. The female disciple from Wuchang sect, who was observing, had a calm expression. In her opinion, in front of 6 young powerhouses whose strength was no less than hers, the purple-clad youth, Duanling Tian, had no chance of survival. However, when her gaze inadvertently fell upon the 2 people who were observing just like her, she noticed that both of them looked at the 6 young powerhouses, who were also disciples of second-rate forces, with pity in their eyes. For a moment, her heart skipped a beat, and a faint ominous premonition arose. Could it be that the purple-clad youth had the strength to deal with all 6 of them? As this thought emerged, she found it somewhat absurd. A disciple from a third-rate force, even if he was the top young talent of that third-rate force, absolutely could not withstand the combined assault of 6 young powerhouses whose strength was no less than hers. However, in the next moment she was stunned, her face then flushed red, as if someone had tightly gripped her neck. Her eyes were wide, staring intently at the scene before her, filled with shock and disbelief. Heavens! What did she see? She saw that under the combined attack of the 6 young powerhouses, whose strength was no less than his, the purple-clad youth calmly stepped into the air. Immediately after, a sword appeared out of thin air in his hand. A sword that exuded an aura that instilled fear. This is definitely not a grade 2 spirit sword. At that instant, this thought subconsciously popped into her mind. What shocked her even more was the purple-clad youth's next move. The purple-clad youth's elemental energy surged, then transformed into vast, earthy yellow power, entwined, with streaks of purple lightning and accompanied by solid gusts of azure gale. Not only that, but a sharp aura also emanated from the purple-clad youth's body. Sword concept. As a martial artist, who had also comprehended the sword concept, the female disciple from Wuchang sect was extremely familiar with it. He has comprehended so many concepts, and their levels all seem quite high. In a flash of lightning, the female disciple from Wuchang sect only had time for this thought. The next moment, she witnessed a scene that would be unforgettable for the rest of her life. A scene that would startle her awake countless times in her dreams in the days to come. At that time, how grateful she was for making the right choice today. At the same time, the female disciple from Wuchang sect clearly saw. As the purple-clad youth raised his hand and swept out with a sword, a terrifying sword ray twisted, flashed past like lightning. A fleeting moment. The next moment, the 6 young powerhouses who had charged fiercely at him were all sliced in half at the waist, their severed bodies carried by inertia and colliding together. Everything happened in an instant. All 6 died, not even one having time to let out a scream. The female disciple from Wuchang sect was stunned, completely stunned. After a long while, she recovered, her face covered in fear, and she couldn't help but murmur, "Senior brother, Peng Bao, I owe you another life," she knew. Today, if it weren't for the purple-clad youth mentioning Peng Bao, and her consequently retreating because she remembered Peng Bao's life-saving grace from back then it wouldn't have just been 6 people who died. She, too, would not have survived. Boom, 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 boom. The severed bodies, cut in half at the waist, crashed to the ground, quickly staining the area where they landed into a river of blood, a shocking sight. The two disciples from Yungang Temple were terrified, their faces pale and their bodies trembling. Although they had long realized that the scene before them might occur when they truly witnessed it with their own eyes, they still couldn't help but feel a surge of fear, unable to recover for a long time. Those 6 young powerhouses, though all disciples of second-rate forces, but in their opinion, Duanling Tian of the Five Elements sect, his cultivation had long surpassed that of ordinary young disciples in second-rate forces, unless it was a top-tier figure among the younger generation of second-rate forces. Otherwise, they could not be Duanling Tian's opponent. As for the top-tier figures among the younger generation of second-rate forces, although they had not met them, they could tell with their naked eyes that the 6 who attacked Duanling Tian were definitely not at that level. The 6 could, at most, be considered relatively outstanding disciples among the younger generation of second-rate forces. However, Duanling Tian instantly killing 6 void-prying stage first-level disciples from second-rate forces in a single encounter still filled them with deep-seated fear. Duanling Tian's strength seems to have grown even stronger. The two exchanged glances, both seeing the same meaning in each other's eyes, and deep within their gazes was a fear that originated from the bottom of their hearts. An ant trying to stop a chariot. Sweeping a cold glance at the 6 severed bodies on the ground, Duanling Tian's lips curled into a cold smile. His spiritual energy had long detected the cultivation of the 6, all of whom were void-prying stage first-level martial artists, and in front of him now, they were not worth mentioning. With a raise of his hand, elemental energy surged out, and Duanling Tian collected the Grade 2 spirit weapons and storage rings of the 6. These were his spoils of war. Immediately after, Duanling Tian casually glanced at the female disciple from Wuchang sect and the 2 lay disciples from Yungang Temple. Duanling Tian, we will absolutely not reveal that you obtained the profound fragment. Seeing Duanling Tian's gaze sweep towards them, the 2 lay disciples from Yungang Temple nervously pricked their fingers, and 2 drops of blood shot into the air, making a vow under the 9-9 thunder tribulation. Seeing this scene, Duanling Tian was speechless. When did he ask them to make a vow? He knew in his heart, since the news of him obtaining the profound fragment was intentionally spread by someone, it must have already reached the ears of most of the young powerhouses who entered the Martial Emperor's treasure. Except for a few who were out of the loop, everyone else must have known about this news, no matter who it is. Anyone who dares to scheme against me, Duanling Tian, just wait to endure my endless wrath. Duanling Tian's eyes grew cold and his anger surged. Whoosh, under the wary gazes of the 2 lay disciples from Yungang Temple and the female disciple, from Wuchang sect, Duanling Tian moved, disappearing from their sight in a flash, as if he had vanished into thin air. At this point, the 3 of them finally let out a sigh of relief. In front of Duanling Tian, they felt a deep-seated oppression. He was a terrifying god of slaughter. When their gazes fell upon the 6 severed bodies before them, their faces once again turned pale, and a trace of deep-seated fear appeared in their eyes. You 2, did you know he had such strong power earlier? The female disciple from Wuchang sect looked at the 2 lay disciples from Yungang Temple and asked calmly. Of course, when he first entered the Martial Emperor's treasure, he annihilated 48 young disciples from third-rate forces, whose strength was no less than ours, with just 2 sword strikes. He's a monster. I have to say, your choice just now was correct. Otherwise, your fate would definitely be the same as theirs. As the 2 lay disciples from Yungang Temple spoke, their gazes once again fell upon the severed bodies piled in the river of blood before them, and their bodies inexplicably trembled. 2 sword strikes, killing 48 young disciples. From third-rate forces, the female disciple from Wuchang sect's pupils involuntarily constricted. Since they were young disciples, sent into the Martial Emperor's treasure by third-rate forces, they must have been outstanding talents. Among the younger generation of those third-rate forces, their strength couldn't be too weak. To kill 48 young disciples from third-rate forces with just 2 sword strikes. She questioned herself, wondering if her own strength could achieve this. Even if she could, she doubted she could do it so cleanly and decisively. Duanling Tian, senior brother Peng Bao, what kind of monster have you befriended? At some point, a bitter smile appeared on the female disciple from Wuchang sect's lips. If it weren't for the other party mentioning Peng Bao in time, and her retreating from the battle, due to her gratitude for Peng Bao's past life-saving grace, she would now be dead beyond dead. Duanling Tian naturally had no time to ponder the thoughts of the female disciple from Wuchang sect, and the 2 lay disciples from Yungang Temple. He was currently continuing to search for the direction to the central area of the Martial Emperor's treasure. Of course, along the way, he couldn't help but deduce who had framed him, someone who knows my name and my background. The person who framed me can only be someone from the 6 major forces who entered the Martial Emperor's treasure with me. The 19 disciples of Kenglang Fort were all annihilated by me as soon as they entered the Martial Emperor's treasure. Could it be Zishang who spread the news? Thinking of this, Duanling Tian frowned. In his opinion, this was the most likely possibility. Although Zishang had already been killed by him, who knew if Zishang had framed him before and maliciously spread the news of him obtaining the profound fragment? No, that's not right. Soon, Duanling Tian seemed to remember something and abruptly shook his head. The remnant soul hidden within Zishang most likely came from the demon sealing tablet. After all, he once possessed a demon sealing tablet fragment. Most importantly, the remnant soul in Zishang, which seems to belong to a martial emperor, appears to recognize the demon sealing tablet. He probably knows the tablet's secrets. Therefore, he must be very familiar with the value of the demon sealing tablet, which means Zishang wouldn't frame me like that. Otherwise, if I were killed by someone else, the demon sealing tablet would also fall into their hands. In a short while, Duanling Tian thought of many things. First, he was certain of one thing. Zishang knew the value of the demon sealing tablet. Previously, when he was hunted by the 4 vice fort masters of Kangwell Fort, it was Zishang who orchestrated it from behind using the demon sealing tablet. Perhaps Zishang wanted the people of Kangwell Fort to get the demon sealing tablet first, and then he would find another way to retrieve it. With the help of that remnant soul, which is suspected to be a martial emperor, it wouldn't be difficult for him to possess strength superior to Kangwell Fort in the future. But in this martial emperor's secret treasure, it's different. Once he spreads the news of me obtaining a profundity fragment and frames me, he might not even know who killed me, let alone retrieve the demon sealing tablet from my killer. Thinking of this, Duanling Tian was completely certain. The person who framed him was not Zishang. As long as Zishang was interested in the demon sealing tablet in his possession, he would never do such a foolish thing. But if it wasn't Zishang, then who could it be? While swiftly moving, Duanling Tian frowned, thinking for a long time, but still couldn't figure out who was framing him from behind. Could it be those 2 disciples from the Sun Moon sect? Soon, Duanling Tian thought of the only 2 remaining disciples of the Sun Moon sect. Their motive was undoubtedly the greatest. After all, the other 18 disciples of the Sun Moon sect had died by his hand. If the 2 wanted to avenge those 18, they indeed had a motive to do so. Besides them, the people from the Heartbreak sect also have a motive. When he first entered the Martial Emperor's secret treasure, he had not only eliminated 19 disciples from Kangwell Fort and 17 disciples from the Sun Moon sect, but also 12 disciples from the Heartbreak sect. Among the Angst Dao, remaining Heartbreak sect disciples, perhaps someone wants to avenge the deceased Heartbreak sect disciples. Duanling Tian thought to himself. Soon, Duanling Tian couldn't help but smile wryly again. And there's Lian Xiong, that disciple from the Blade Sword sect. Before even entering the Martial Emperor's secret treasure, he had an arm crippled by Tian Wu because of me. Although he reattached his arm later, he must hate me. Duanling Tian's heart stirred, and he continued to ponder over suspicious individuals. He found that as he continued to think, whether it was disciples from the Blade Sword sect, or Cloud Sky Temple, or even the 5 Element sect, all seemed capable of framing him. This is truly a headache. Duanling Tian shook his head, no longer thinking too much, but a chilling glint appeared in his eyes. No matter who it is, anyone who dares to scheme against me behind my back. As long as I find you, I will make sure you die without a burial. Place. Duanling Tian moved at lightning speed like the wind, darting through cave after cave. Along the way, wherever Duanling Tian passed, he heard many surviving young powerhouses discussing him, mostly about him obtaining a profundity fragment. After spending half a month, Duanling Tian finally confirmed the direction of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure's central area and began heading towards it. Finally, the direction is confirmed. The palace left by that Martial Emperor is over there. Duanling Tian's speed towards the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure soared to its peak, leaving only a purple lightning-like blur for the young powerhouses he passed along the way. That person's speed is so fast. Indeed, I can't even catch a glimpse of him. Such speed. His strength must be at least above the 4th level of the void-prying stage. Gazing at the fleeting purple figure, the young powerhouses along the way couldn't help but sigh in admiration, feeling inferior. While Duanling Tian was rushing towards the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure, in various parts of the secret treasure, many young powerhouses also figured out the direction of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure and began to advance towards the central area. Brother Ling Tian obtained a profundity fragment. Of the two figures swiftly heading towards the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure, one of them, after hearing the discussions of the young powerhouses they encountered along the way, couldn't help but be surprised. "Peng Bao, do you know that Duan Ling Tian?" The other person was Lei Jun, the second strongest among the younger generation of the Soaring Cloud sect. As for the former, it was Peng Bao, the second strongest among the younger generation of the Impermanence sect. I know him. He's a friend of mine. I just didn't expect him to have the strength to obtain an profundity fragment. Peng Bao nodded, and as he spoke, a hint of surprise appeared on his face. He never expected that the young man he had met once before would possess such strong power. As someone who had obtained a profundity fragment from the outer regions of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure, he clearly understood that to obtain a profundity fragment, besides needing luck, one also needed sufficient strength. Otherwise, the puppets guarding the profundity fragments would be enough to cause a headache. Besides the puppets, the box containing the profundity fragment would also emit a highly penetrating sound, attracting nearby people to rush over. If one couldn't withstand the people who came later, the profundity fragment would only change hands. Therefore, to obtain a profundity fragment, luck was secondary. Strength was the most important. If I encounter him, and I seize the profundity fragment from him, you wouldn't interfere, would you? Lei Jun's eyes flashed, and he asked in a deep voice, "When I meet him, I will ask him what kind of profundity fragment he obtained. If it's what our impermanent sect needs, I will exchange the profundity fragment in my hand with him," Peng Bao said calmly, without answering Lei Jun's question. Upon hearing this, Lei Jun's eyes lit up. The profundity fragment in Peng Bao's hand was undoubtedly what he desperately wanted to obtain. With that profundity fragment in Peng Bao's hand, he had no way of getting it. But once it fell into the hands of a disciple of that third-rate force, the five-element sect, wouldn't it be as easy as flipping a hand for him to snatch it? A young disciple of a third-rate force, even if he was the top person of that third-rate force's younger generation, could he possibly surpass him? The second strongest among the younger generation of the second-rate force, the Soaring Cloud sect? Lei Jun was full of confidence in his own strength. Now, I only hope that the profundity fragment in Duan Ling Tian's hand is what the impermanent sect needs. Even if it isn't, I will still snatch that profundity fragment from him. A cold glint flashed in Lei Jun's eyes as he muttered, "An ant from a third-rate force has no right to obtain a profundity fragment." Whoosh, whoosh! Peng Bao and Lei Jun moved very quickly, heading towards the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure. At the same time, many other people were also heading towards the central area. Whoosh! A fiery red figure, filled with a scorching aura, swept through cave after cave in a flash, its speed making many young powerhouses along the way feel ashamed. Brother Duan should also be heading towards the central area now, right? The figure flying out was a red-clad woman who, as she moved, resembled a fire spirit dancing gracefully. The woman's beauty was capable of toppling nations and captivating all beings. She appeared to be only in her early 20s, and as she hurried along, a hint of anticipation mixed with her brows. In her mind, the image of the purple-clad youth appeared, instantly causing her pretty face to flush, making her look even more endearing. Whoosh, whoosh! On the other side of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure, two figures flew side by side, moving extremely fast. These were a young man in red and a young man in blue. They looked exactly alike, clearly a pair of twin brothers. However, their expressions were vastly different. The red-clad youth's face showed a rich variety of emotions, while the blue-clad youth's face was extremely stern without any change from beginning to end. Duan Ling Tian obtained a profundity fragment. The red-clad youth's face showed a hint of surprise. It seems his luck isn't any worse than ours. The blue-clad youth raised an eyebrow, saying nothing more. The profound enlightenment array we found in this Martial Emperor's secret treasure is much stronger than the one we experienced in the sect back then. Just looking at the improvement our intent received, we know that many profundity fragments were integrated into that profound enlightenment array, and they were extremely advanced. The red-clad youth sighed. These twin brothers were none other than the Nangong brothers from the five-element sect. The stern-faced blue-clad youth was naturally Nangong Chen. As for the red-clad youth with the exaggerated expression, he was Nangong Yi. The two brothers were one quiet, one active. After entering the Martial Emperor's secret treasure, besides each obtaining a Grade 1 spirit weapon, they also entered a self-activating Profound Enlightenment Array. Inside the Profound Enlightenment Array, after 3 hours, their intent had greatly improved. This improvement, compared to their previous improvement in the five-element sect's Profound Enlightenment Array, was like heaven and earth. The 5-element sect's Profound Enlightenment Array was not worth mentioning compared to the Profound Enlightenment Array in this Martial Emperor's secret treasure. It's a pity that Profound Enlightenment Array can only be activated once. Otherwise, if we entered again, our intent might have reached the 9th level high tier. Nangong Yi sighed, saying with a look of regret, "Greedy?" Nangong Chen coolly uttered 2 words, "Don't you want to?" Nangong Yi looked at Nangong Chen with disdain. However, speaking of it, the opportunity we got is still better than Duanling Tian's. Although he obtained a profundity fragment, he has to hand it over to the sect. It will be difficult for him to survive, Nangong Chen said, being as concise as possible. Indeed, we didn't expect it. That the people who entered the Martial Emperor's secret treasure from other entrances would actually be those from the 3 second-rate forces. Nangong Yi nodded, his face full of apprehension. Since they had all heard about Duanling Tian obtaining an ability fragment, it was likely that the top young powerhouses from second-rate forces had also heard about it. Currently, Duanling Tian must have become the target of everyone. This was not difficult for them to guess. Although Duanling Tian's strength is formidable, he might still struggle to contend with the top young powerhouses from second-rate forces. Nangong Yi took a deep breath, his words revealing his apprehension towards the few top young powerhouses from second-rate forces. As for the ordinary young powerhouses from second-rate forces, he could easily handle them with his current strength. However, against the top young powerhouses from second-rate forces, he had no confidence whatsoever. Second-rate forces were called such not only because they had Martial Emperor powerhouses guarding them, but also because the young powerhouses they cultivated were far stronger than those cultivated by third-rate forces like their 5-element sect. Nangong Chen rarely nodded, agreeing with Nangong Yi's words. At the same time, across various parts of the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure, more and more people confirmed the direction of the central area and began to rush towards it. Duanling Tian, who was heading towards the central area of the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure, had just passed through a cave when he saw 3 extremely familiar figures in the distance. The 3 of them were moving in the same direction, as him, clearly also heading towards the central area of the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure. Big Niu, Su Li, Brother Zhang. Duanling Tian moved like lightning, following the 3 like a ghost, and when he reached their side, he smiled and greeted them. These 3 were none other than Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyong. Duanling Tian hadn't expected to meet them here, nor had he expected them to be together. Duanling Tian, Brother Ling Tian. Duanling Tian's appearance brought great surprise to Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyong. Seeing Duanling Tian again, a hint of excitement appeared in their eyes. Duanling Tian, you really are something. I thought you had already been killed, Huang Danyu cursed with a smile. Duanling Tian, did you really obtain an ability fragment? Su Li looked at Duanling Tian, his eyes burning with curiosity, as he asked. Zhang Shouyong also looked at Duanling Tian. If I say no, would you believe me? Hearing Su Li ask this question, Duanling Tian knew that Su Li and the others must have also heard the rumors about him obtaining an ability fragment, and he couldn't help but smile bitterly. Although he had indeed obtained an ability fragment, no other living person knew about it. As for the news that was currently spreading like wildfire, it was completely someone trying to frame him. No? Hearing Duanling Tian's words, not only Su Li and Zhang Shouyong, but even Huang Danyu couldn't help but be surprised. Someone wants to frame me. Duanling Tian's eyes flashed, a cold glint passing through them as if he wanted to devour someone. However, I don't know who it is yet, but it's certain that it should be someone who came in through entrance number 2 with us. If I find out who it is, I'll definitely kill them. Duanling Tian's words caused Huang Danyu's face to darken, and he clenched his fist in anger. That person is trying to frame you like this, clearly wanting you to be killed. That person must have a grudge against you. Could it be the only 2 remaining disciples of the Sun-Moon sect? Su Li speculated. It could also be Lian Xiong. Zhang Shouyong, who was beside him, his eyes flashed, and he said in a deep voice, "Among the Saber Sword sect, everyone knows that Lian Xiong is a vengeful person. He suffered such a great loss in front of Brother Ling Tian last time, so he definitely won't let it go. I've thought about everyone you mentioned. Even disciples of the Duan Qing sect and others are all possibilities. The person who framed me might not necessarily have a grudge against me. It could also be pure jealousy, not wanting me to survive in the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure." Duanling Tian spoke slowly, and as he continued, he revealed his own deductions. For a moment, Huang Danyu and the other 2 fell silent. That person is truly insidious. With just one sentence, he's put you in a dangerous situation. Now, those young powerhouses from second-rate forces are definitely all looking for you, Huang Danyu said, with a look of apprehension. Second-rate forces? Hearing Huang Danyu's words, Duanling Tian raised an eyebrow. Among the disciples of second-rate forces he had encountered and fought so far, none were his match. All had died by his hand. Even that Peng Bao from the Wuchang sect. With my current strength, it shouldn't be difficult to defeat him. Unconsciously, Duanling Tian recalled Peng Bao, whom he had met once before. At that time, his spiritual power had detected that Peng Bao was a void transformation stage third-level martial artist. If it were his past self, he wouldn't have had much confidence against Peng Bao. But his current self was different. Unless Peng Bao encountered some great fortuitous encounter, he couldn't possibly be his opponent. Duanling Tian, have you had any other gains on your journey? The four of them traveled together towards the central area of the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure, and along the way, Huang Danyu couldn't help but ask curiously, "It's all right. I obtained a 9th-level earthly insight fragment and a spirit fruit," Duanling Tian said with a smile, but he didn't mention the 7th-level Emperor Realm earthly insight fragment. Otherwise, wouldn't he be admitting that the person who framed him was telling the truth? At that point, that person wouldn't be framing him, but rather speaking the truth. That was something he didn't want to see. What about you, after stating his gains? Duanling Tian looked at Huang Danyu and the other two. How did the three of you meet? I met Su Li first, Huang Danyu said. Su Li nodded. Later, Big Niu and I met Brother Zhang, and the three of us traveled together, and we did have some gains. So far, we've pretty much gathered all the 9th-level insight fragments that are useful to us. It seems your gains are also quite good. Duanling Tian chuckled. Duanling Tian, you don't know. Besides these gains, the three of us also encountered an ability fragment, and it was an 8th-level Emperor Realm Wind ability fragment, Huang Danyu said, sighing as he spoke, his face filled with regret. 8th-level Emperor Realm Wind ability fragment? Hearing Huang Danyu's words, Duanling Tian couldn't help but be surprised. Although he also had an Emperor Realm Wind ability fragment in his hand, it was only a 3rd-level Emperor Realm Wind ability fragment, far inferior to that 8th-level Emperor Realm Wind ability fragment. You didn't get it? Seeing Huang Danyu sigh, Duanling Tian's eyes flashed, and he asked curiously, "Since you didn't get it, that means the person who obtained that ability fragment is stronger than you. But why did he let you go? Doesn't he worry that you'll spread the news of him obtaining the ability fragment? He did want to kill us, but we narrowly escaped. Also, he didn't seem to care if we spread the news of him obtaining the ability fragment," Zhang Shouyong said with a bitter smile. What do you mean? Duanling Tian was stunned, looking puzzled. In his opinion, since that person wanted to kill Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyong, it meant he was worried that the three of them would spread the news of the ability fragment he had obtained. But why did Zhang Shouyong say that person didn't care if they spread the news? Wasn't this a contradiction? Soon, after hearing Su Li's explanation, Duanling Tian finally understood what was going on. You mean he just casually stomped his foot on the ground and killed those disciples from the Chuyun sect and Wuchang sect? Duanling Tian couldn't help but gasp, although from the mouths of Su Li and the other two, he could guess that those disciples from the Chuyun sect and Wuchang sect were the weakest among the group of disciples from second-rate forces who entered the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure. Yet that black-clothed young man could actually kill them with a stomp of his foot, and almost wipe out Su Li and the other two as well, which deeply shocked him. That person's strength is probably at least at the Void Transformation stage 2nd or 3rd level. Most importantly, he comprehends earthly insight, and can borrow earth power, Huang Danyu said with a look of apprehension. According to your description, he's at least a Void Transformation stage 3rd level martial artist. Not only that, his comprehended earthly insight is at least at the 3rd level high grade or above. Duanling Tian speculated, drawing upon the knowledge in the reincarnation Martial Emperor's memories. Forget it. Let's not talk about him. It's bad luck to bring him up. Huang Danyu shook his head. Duanling Tian, now that the news of you obtaining an ability fragment has spread, why don't you just not go to the central area of the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure? That's right. Duanling Tian, what you need to do now is protect yourself. Su Li agreed, Brother Ling. Tian, I also think you shouldn't go. Once you're there, human greed will make you the target of everyone. Zhang Shouyong also said. Hearing their concern, Duanling Tian felt a warmth in his heart, just as he was about to say something. Are you Duanling Tian? A cold snort came from an exit of the cave in front of Duanling Tian and the other. 3, clearly reaching Duanling Tian's ears. Immediately after, Duanling Tian saw a black figure appear on the path ahead of the four of them. This was a young man dressed in black, with an indifferent face. His eyes, though seemingly dull, actually concealed killing intent, giving off an invisible sense of oppression. Duanling Tian raised an eyebrow, extending his spiritual power to try and probe the other party's cultivation. "It's you!" Just then, the exclamations of Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyong almost caused Duanling Tian's spiritual power to dissipate, filling Duanling Tian with curiosity from the bottom of his heart. Huang Danyu and the other two knew this black-clothed young man. "Duanling Tian, he's the person we told you about earlier. We just didn't expect him to be nearby. And he even heard our conversation just now." Su Li's elemental energy condensed into a voice that entered Duanling Tian's ears, answering the confusion in Duanling Tian's heart. "So, that 8th level Emperor Realm Wind ability fragment is on him?" Hearing Su Li's words, Duanling Tian's gaze burned as he stared at the black-clothed young man standing not far away, blocking their path. In the depths of his eyes, killing intent flashed. As Duanling Tian looked at the black-clothed youth, a murderous glint flashed in his eyes, and the black-clothed youth's gaze towards him was equally filled with a chilling, man-eating intent. A hint of greed was clearly visible in the black-clothed youth's murderous eyes. It seems he also heard the news of me obtaining an omen fragment. Duanling Tian, ever observant, caught the greed lurking deep in the black-clothed youth's eyes, and his heart stirred as he vaguely guessed something. At the same time, Duanling Tian's spiritual energy extended outwards, immediately detecting the black-clothed youth's cultivation level. After sensing the black-clothed youth's cultivation, Duanling Tian's gaze narrowed involuntarily. "I never thought I'd run into you three again here. Last time you were lucky, and I spared your lives. This time, since you're walking with this Duanling Tian, then you can all die together." The black-clothed youth's cold gaze paused on Duanling Tian for a moment, then fell upon Huang. Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyong, his tone chilling. No sooner had he spoken than the black-clothed youth lifted his foot, his Yuan force surging, then merging with the earth intent to form a vast, earthy yellow power that slammed violently onto the ground. Boom! A loud bang resonated, and the entire cave shook as if an earthquake had struck. A gaping crack erupted from beneath the black-clothed youth's foot, then split into 4 cracks, heading directly towards Duanling Tian, Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyong. The cracks spread with astonishing speed, like lightning, terrifying. To behold, Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyong's faces paled. At this moment, they could clearly feel that the black-clothed youth's attack today was significantly stronger than his previous assault on them. He held back last time. The same thought popped into all 3 of their minds simultaneously. And in that instant, the 3 sprawling, terrifying cracks had already reached them, leaving them no time to resist or escape. For a moment, they felt despair from the bottom of their hearts. Are we going to die? In a flash of lightning, a hint of desolation appeared in their eyes. Boom, 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 boom! At the critical moment, 4 loud bangs exploded, clearly reaching their ears and jolting them awake as if from a dream. The next moment, they clearly saw the 3 menacing cracks containing extremely terrifying power that were spreading towards them were suppressed by an even more powerful force just inches away. Not only the cracks extending towards them, but even the power within the crack extending towards Duanling Tian was suppressed. The one who acted was, naturally, Duanling Tian. At some unknown point, Duanling Tian was standing midair, his purple robes fluttering without wind, appearing incredibly graceful and debonair. He stood with his hands behind his back, calmly looking at the black-clothed youth opposite him. It was as if he hadn't been the one who had just acted. The black-clothed youth stood there, and above his head, the power of heaven and earth surged, coalescing into 800 ancient horned dragon phantoms, winding down, lifelike. 3rd level of the void-prying stage. When Duanling Tian's spiritual energy extended earlier, he immediately detected the black-clothed youth's cultivation. 3rd level, high-grade, earth intent. Now, as the black-clothed youth made his move, he could even discern the level of the earth intent the black-clothed youth had comprehended. The power of 800 ancient horned dragons. And he hasn't even resonated with the earth, using his earth intent to borrow earth's power. Once he borrows earth's power, even without a spirit weapon, he can unleash the power of 1,000 ancient horned dragons. Although Duanling Tian's gaze remained calm, his heart couldn't help but be startled. The 3rd level high-grade earth intent once unleashed is comparable to the power of 400 ancient horned dragons. If he borrows earth's power, it can add another half of his power, which is 200 ancient horned dragons worth of power. Adding that to the 4th level void-prying stage, Yuan force, which is comparable to 400 ancient horned dragons worth of power, the black-clothed youth could unleash the power of 1,000 ancient horned dragons without a spirit weapon. The black-clothed youth's originally cold and calm expression couldn't help but change. Slightly after Duanling Tian suppressed his 4 forces, the opponent acted like lightning, And without even causing a heaven and earth phenomenon, by drawing upon the power of heaven and earth, he suppressed his power. The opponent's power was clearly above the 800 ancient horned dragons, worth of power he had just unleashed, although the opponent, like him, had not used a spirit weapon. But he was not afraid in the slightest, because he hadn't borrowed Earth's power in his previous attack. Once he borrowed Earth's power, his Earth intent would gain another 200 ancient horned dragons worth of power. He believed that by then, the purple-clothed youth in front of him would be no match for him and would be trampled underfoot. No wonder you managed to get an omen fragment. I underestimated you. When the black-clothed youth looked at Duanling Tian again, his expression returned to calm, but a hint of solemnity appeared deep in his eyes, truly treating Duanling Tian as an opponent. Duanling Tian's strength. When Huang Danyu saw the 800 ancient horned dragon phantoms appear above the black-clothed youth's head, his pupils couldn't help but contract. After recovering, his gaze immediately fell upon the purple figure standing in the air. At this moment, even just a purple-back view appeared incredibly tall in Huang Danyu's eyes. The power of 800 ancient horned dragons was suppressed by Duanling Tian with just a flick of his hand. And Duanling Tian didn't even use a spirit weapon? Huang Danyu felt his heart pounding terrifyingly fast, unable to accept this astonishing fact for a long time. Although he didn't know Duanling Tian inside and out, the strength Duanling Tian had displayed before him in the past, and the strength he was displaying now, made him feel as if they weren't the same person at all. How long had it been for Duanling Tian's strength to become so formidable? Duanling Tian said earlier. That he obtained a spiritual fruit? Or could it be that spiritual fruit helped him break through? At the same time, Huang Danyu couldn't help but secretly guess. Su Li and Zhang Shouyong's gazes, by coincidence, fell upon Duanling Tian, filled with an incredibly complex light. Compared to Huang Danyu, they had known Duanling Tian earlier, and they had almost watched Duanling Tian grow step by step. Now, the gap between them and Duanling Tian was growing wider and wider. This gap made them almost suffocate. However, even though your strength is good, you will still die today. Not just you, but also your 3 friends, all of you will die. The black-clothed youth's gaze turned cold, and the earthy yellow power on his body trembled violently, then formed a special connection with the entire cave. A moment later, the earthy yellow power on his body began to boil. At the same time, above his head, another 200 ancient horned dragon phantoms appeared, falling before Huang Danyu and the other 2, making their faces change dramatically. He just unleashed the power of 800 ancient horned dragons, and he hadn't even borrowed Earth's power yet? Huang Danyu's pupils constricted. Borrowing Earth's power, his strength is comparable to 1,000 ancient horned dragons, and he still hasn't used a spirit weapon. How strong would he be if he used a spirit weapon? Su Li and Zhang Shouyong's pupils constricted to their maximum, their heartbeats suddenly accelerating, the frequency growing faster and faster, taking a long time to calm down. A bitter smile, unnoticed, appeared on both their lips. No wonder. He didn't flee or show any fear after seeing his power suppressed by Duanling Tian. So, he hadn't borrowed Earth's power yet. Despair welled up in the hearts of Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyong. Although Duanling Tian had shown great strength just now, they didn't believe Duanling Tian could defeat the black-clothed youth, who could unleash the power of 1,000 ancient horned dragons without a spirit weapon. At some point, a giant hammer appeared in the black-clothed youth's hand. As soon as the hammer appeared, it was enveloped by earthy yellow power, emanating waves of domineering aura. Whoosh! In an instant, above the black-clothed youth's head, the power of heaven and earth surged again, and beside the 1,000 ancient horned dragon phantoms, another 350-odd ancient horned dragon phantoms quickly appeared. The black-clothed youth's cultivation was at the 4th level of the void-prying stage, and his full Yuan force explosion was comparable to the power of 400 ancient horned dragons. This giant hammer, on the basis of 400 ancient horned dragons worth of power, added over 350 ancient horned dragons worth of power to the black-clothed youth. It's grade evident. An 88% increase, a first-grade spirit weapon. Duanling Tian's eyes narrowed, and he immediately saw through the grade of the giant hammer in the black-clothed youth's hand, a first-grade spirit weapon. The black-clothed youth held the giant hammer, standing there, the vast earthy yellow. Power emanating from him twisting into a vortex with the giant hammer in his hand as its center. The vortex spread, stirring up faint bursts of air explosions. As the vast power spread and affected the cave floor, the ground cracked and dense cracks spread out, forming a giant spider web. Not only that, but gusts of wind centered on the black-clothed youth swept out in all directions, quickly filling the entire cave and making the robes of Duanling Tian and the other 3 flap wildly. You guys retreat first. Duan Lingtian didn't turn back, calmly gazing at the black-clothed youth, and slowly spoke. His words, naturally, were not directed at the black-clothed youth. Huang Danyu and the other two, hearing this, exchanged glances, then sighed and retreated from the cave, standing together at one of the cave's exits, looking from afar at the confronting Duan Lingtian and the black-clothed youth. They knew that facing such a powerful black-clothed youth staying would not only fail to help Duan Lingtian, but might even become a burden. You are a disciple of the Northern Underworld sect? Duan Lingtian stood in the air, facing the black-clothed youth with over 1,350 ancient horned dragon phantoms above his head, his face still calm, and he asked faintly. Earlier, he had heard Huang Danyu say, "This black-clothed youth killed disciples of the Wuchang sect and Chuyan sect without even blinking an eye. Therefore, the opponent could not be a disciple of the Wuchang sect or the Chuyan sect." The dead don't need to know my identity. The black-clad young man, holding a massive hammer like a peerless war god, his black robes fluttering, spoke slowly, his voice as cold as ice, his eyes flashing with a chilling glint. "Yes, why would I need to know the identity of a dead man?" Upon hearing the black-clad young man's words, Duan Lingtian was first stunned. Then he started to laugh. A brilliant, radiant laugh. Duan Lingtian's laughter made Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyong exchange glances. At a time like this, Duan Lingtian can still laugh. Could it be that he's confident he can defeat that black-clad young man? Su Li's pupils constricted as he murmured in a low voice. That black-clad young man, using a spirit weapon, can unleash the power of over 1,350 ancient horned dragons. If Duan Lingtian can defeat him, then Duan Lingtian's strength... Huang. Dan Yu trailed off, unable to finish his sentence, and couldn't help but gasp in a cold breath. I've known Brother Lingtian for many years, and I'm well aware of his character. Since he can laugh at this moment, it's clear he's confident he can defeat or even kill that black-clad young man. Zhang Shouyong stared intently at the purple figure, standing in midair in the distance, muttering softly. Hearing Zhang Shouyong's words, the hearts of Huang Danyu and Su Li, which had been suspended, finally settled. Their eyes revealed a hint of anticipation, looking forward to Duan Lingtian's move. "You're asking for death," hearing Duan Lingtian's words, and seeing the brilliant smile on his face, the black-clad young man could no longer hold back. After a furious shout, he vanished from his original spot. Whoosh! The massive hammer in the black-clad young man's hand broke through the air, carrying his entire being, like a cannonball shot from its barrel, charging towards Duan Lingtian with fierce momentum. Wherever it passed, the air current swept, creating bursts of thunderous air explosions. As the air explosions erupted, an invisible wave of air quivered, pushing the air currents to create a vast gale that swept out in all directions, filling the entire cave with dust and a series of ear-piercing wind howls. The massive hammer in the black-clad young man's hand, imbued with the power of over 1,350 ancient horned dragons, was like a meteorite falling with lightning speed, striking down fiercely on Duan Lingtian's head. What powerful strength! As the massive hammer plummeted, scattering the air currents, Duan Lingtian's eyes narrowed slightly and his expression became a little more serious. Facing the massive hammer, which dragged the black-clad young man along as it struck, a sword appeared out of thin air in Duan Lingtian's hand, a sword radiating a sharp aura. As Duan Lingtian's milky white elemental energy surged, transforming into an earthy yellow power that poured into the sword, thick purple lightning bolts, like electric snakes coiled around the sword's body. Boom, 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 boom. Immediately, a series of faint air explosions rang out. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. At the same time, swift azure gales appeared, coiling around the sword's body, emitting a series of sharp auras. In a flash of lightning, Duano Lingtian raised the quasi-emperor-grade spirit sword in his hand, holding it vertically above his head. At the same time, an unparalleled sharp aura emanated from his entire body. In an instant, the power from the sword in Duan Lingtian's hand spread throughout his entire body, making him and the sword seem to merge into one. The earthy yellow power, entwined with purple lightning and azure gales, spread over his body, and the sword in his hand, enveloping him in the sword, transforming into a giant sword. Whoosh! As the earthy yellow power, entwined with purple lightning and azure gales, exploded beneath Duan Lingtian's feet, the giant sword shot up into the sky, pointing directly at the menacing, meteor-like, plummeting massive hammer. An unparalleled, sharp aura as the giant sword soared filled the entire cave. Even Huang Danyu and the other two, standing at the exit, clearly felt this aura. What a powerful sword intent. Su Li's pupils suddenly constricted. As a sword cultivator, Su Li had a special sensitivity to sword intent, far surpassing Huang Danyu and Zhang Shouyong. Whoosh! And just then, his attention suddenly shifted. his gaze focusing on the giant sword that was about to collide with the massive hammer. He could see that Duanling Tian was not using any martial arts, and the black-clad young man, likewise, was not using any martial arts. It was more like a brute force clash between the two. They discarded all complicated techniques, simply clashing and fighting with pure strength, fully displaying the passion and hot-bloodedness of martial artists. Boom! The massive hammer in the black-clad young man's hand, like the hammer of Thor, slammed down, causing the air currents to continuously scatter like a huge rock falling into a calm lake, stirring up countless ripples. The power of over 1,350 ancient horned dragons endowed the massive hammer with immense strength, and gave the black-clad young man a deep-seated confidence. Whoosh! Duanling Tian, transformed into a giant sword with his person and sword, shot out fiercely, meeting the massive hammer striking down from the black-clad young man's hand, without the slightest fear. Unlike the over 1,350 ancient horned dragon phantoms that the black-clad young man, his person, and his hammer drew upon the power of heaven and earth to form. From the moment Duanling Tian made his move until now, it all happened in an instant. The power of heaven and earth was still surging in the void where he passed, not yet having time to gather into a heaven and earth phenomenon. An ant trying to stop a chariot. Facing the giant sword that Duanling Tian transformed into with his person and sword, the black-clad young man's face was filled with disdain. The earthy yellow power coiling around the massive hammer in his hand swelled even more, spanning the sky, and he smashed it towards the giant sword. Boom! The massive hammer once again shattered the sky, plummeting down, only an inch away from the giant sword. Whoosh! The giant sword met it without fear, its surging sword light fiercely, colliding with the massive hammer, emitting a series of deafening roars. Boom! 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 The sword light on the giant sword seemed to contain endless power, constantly unleashing itself as it stalemated with the massive hammer in the black-clad young man's hand. In contrast, the massive hammer in the black-clad young man's hand with a single strike also unleashed rolling earthy yellow power, utilizing the triple high-level earth intent that borrowed Earth's power, sweeping out without reservation. However, very quickly, the black-clad young man's expression changed, because he discovered that the power on the giant sword that Duanling Tian had transformed into with his person and sword was continuously rising and strengthening, quickly overpowering the strength contained within the massive hammer in his hand. When he saw the heaven and earth phenomenon finally taking shape in the void above Duanling Tian's head, his face turned pale with shock, and his mind wavered. At the same time, when powerful cultivators clash, distraction is the most taboo. At this moment, the black-clad young man undoubtedly committed a major taboo, causing the power of the massive hammer in his hand to temporarily lose its sustained force. Whoosh! The continuously surging power on the giant sword at the moment. The black-clad young man's distraction caused the hammer's power to change, swept out with destructive force, fiercely colliding with the massive hammer and engulfing the black-clad young man's entire body. Boom! With a loud bang, the black-clad young man, along with his hammer, was sent flying, like an arrow released from a bow, crashing into the cave wall on one side, directly embedding and hanging there. Of course, it was mainly the massive hammer in the black-clad young man's hand that was embedded in the cave wall, with his entire body hanging from the hammer. Ugh! The black-clad young man's blood surged, his throat sweetened, and he couldn't help but spit out a large mouthful of clotted blood. Who knew that once this mouthful of clotted blood came out, it became unstoppable? Every time he opened his mouth, he spat out pools of dazzling clotted blood, which quickly formed a small stream on the ground. After a long while, he finally recovered, his face pale as he looked at the purple-clad young man, Duanling Tian, in the distant void. When the black-clad young man was sent flying, the giant sword formed by Duanling Tian and the quasi-emperor-grade spirit sword had already vanished. Even the quasi-emperor-grade spirit sword had been put away by him. Duanling Tian stood in midair, and above his head in the void, the heaven and earth phenomenon gradually dissipated. The gradually dissipating heaven and earth phenomenon consisted of 1,500 ancient horned dragon phantoms, which was exactly 140 more ancient horned dragon phantoms than the black-clad young man's power. Crushing, absolute crushing. This was still the power that Duanling Tian displayed without using earth intent to communicate with the earth and borrow earth's power. Otherwise, what would be gradually dissipating now would not be 1,500 ancient horned dragon phantoms, but 1,350 ancient horned dragon phantoms. However, even just 1,500 ancient horned dragon phantoms still brought immense shock to Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyang. Over 1,500 ancient horned dragon phantoms. Huang Danyu's eyes were wide and round, his entire person in a state of stupor. Su Li and Zhang Shouyang were much the same, both looking dazed. Duanling Tian's strength had completely stunned them. Whoosh! Duanling Tian stepped through the air, and in an instant he arrived in front of the black-clad young man who was holding the massive hammer and hanging on the cave wall, looking at him with a calm expression. The black-clad young man's face changed, and a hint of terror appeared in his eyes. Even before he was sent flying, he had seen the 14,500 ancient horned dragon phantoms that had formed in the void above Duanling Tian's head. At that moment, he already knew that he was far from being Duanling Tian's opponent. Are you really a disciple of the third-rate force, five-element sect? The black-clad young man's facial muscles trembled continuously, his tone filled with disbelief. The dead don't need to know my identity, Duanling Tian returned. The black-clad young man's earlier words to him verbatim, causing the black-clad young man's face to change drastically. Earthy yellow power surged around him, and he still tried to struggle. Unfortunately, as Duanling Tian spoke, one of his hands was already gathering strength. As soon as his words fell, a palm strike, imbued with the power of over 1,000 ancient horned dragons, swept out and landed on the black-clad young man's body. Boom! Immediately, the earthy yellow power that had just surged from the black-clad young man's body was shattered, and he was struck by Duanling Tian's palm into the cave wall, embedding him there as if he had become a mural. Whoosh! Immediately after, Duanling Tian raised his hand and took off the spatial ring from the black-clad young man's hand, performing a blood recognition without any hesitation. 8th level Emperor Realm Wind Profundity Fragment Duan. Ling Tian's heart stirred, filled with excitement. Soon, with a thought from Duanling Tian, he saw a fragment shimmering with green energy within his spatial ring. It was precisely the fragment of Wind's Profundity. The green energy, shimmering around this fragment of Wind's Profundity, is much deeper than the one I obtained from the Sword Emperor's treasure vault back then. Duanling Tian's eyebrows twitched as he thought to himself. Back then, he had obtained a total of 3 profundity fragments from the Sword Emperor's treasure vault, all of which were triple Imperial Realm profundity fragments, and one of them was a triple Imperial Realm fragment of Wind's Profundity. However, compared to this 8th Imperial Realm fragment of Wind's Profundity, that triple Imperial Realm fragment of Wind's Profundity was simply not worth mentioning. Now that I have obtained this 8th Imperial Realm fragment of Wind's Profundity, that triple Imperial Realm fragment of Wind's Profundity can be used to appease the sect. Duanling Tian's heart stirred, and he made a plan. This time, any 5-element sect disciple who entered the Martial Emperor's secret treasure and obtained a profundity fragment had to hand it over to the sect. If they obtained a second or even a third profundity fragment, they could keep it for themselves. Now, Duanling Tian was preparing to hand over the triple Imperial Realm fragment of Wind's Profundity he had obtained from the Sword Emperor's treasure vault to the sect, which would also be a way to repay the sect for its nurturing grace. For him, who had obtained an 8th Imperial Realm fragment of Wind's Profundity, the triple Imperial Realm fragment of Wind's Profundity was expendable. Duanling Tian. When did you get so strong, you scoundrel? At this moment, among the 3 people stunned at the cave exit in the distance, Huang Danyu was the first to react. As he walked towards Duanling Tian, he looked at him with a face full of astonishment, his eyes still filled with disbelief. Everything that had just happened felt like a dream to him. Su Li and Zhang Shouyang were also awakened by Huang Danyu's voice and walked back into the cave together, heading towards Duanling Tian. Their gazes towards Duanling Tian were also filled with disbelief and astonishment. In their opinion, the strength Duanling Tian had just displayed was simply too exaggerated, completely beyond their imagination. Facing their astonishment, Duanling Tian merely smiled and said nothing more. Whoosh! At the same time, Duanling Tian's gaze fell upon the black-clothed youth he had killed and embedded in the cave wall, and then on the giant hammer beside him, a Grade 1 spirit weapon. Duanling Tian raised his hand and pulled the Grade 1 spirit weapon giant hammer from the cave wall, holding it in his hand and lightly weighing it. It's quite heavy. Duanling Tian, you see, you always use a sword. As for this giant hammer, it doesn't suit you at all. Why don't you... Unbeknownst to him, Huang Danyu had arrived beside Duanling Tian, his eyes gleaming as he stared at the giant hammer in Duanling Tian's hand, unable to resist, rubbing his fists together as he spoke. What? You want to say this giant hammer doesn't suit me, but it suits you? Duanling Tian couldn't help but laugh. How could he not see what Huang Danyu was thinking? He was simply interested in this Grade 1 spirit weapon giant hammer and wanted to obtain it. Huang Danyu, whose thoughts had been exposed by Duanling Tian, chuckled awkwardly, scratching the back of his head with an uncharacteristic honest expression. If you want it, take it. Duan Lingtian shook his head and casually tossed the giant hammer in his hand to Huang Danyu, as if throwing away trash. Huang Danyu hadn't expected Duan Lingtian to give him the Grade 1 spirit weapon giant hammer so readily. He somewhat flusteredly caught the giant hammer, his eyes burning as he looked at Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian, this Grade 1 spirit weapon, are you really giving it to me? What, you don't want it? If you don't want it, I'll give it to Brother Zhang. I think Brother Zhang must also be very interested in this Grade 1 spirit weapon giant hammer, Duan Lingtian teased with a smile. Want it? Of course, I want it. How could I not want it? Hearing Duan Lingtian's words and seeing Zhang Shouyang slowly approaching, his gaze falling on the giant hammer in his hand, Huang Danyu immediately became anxious. He was truly afraid that Duan Lingtian would take back the giant hammer and give it to Zhang Shouyang. Brother Zhang, I'll help you upgrade your wine gourd to a Grade 1 spirit weapon later. The Grade 1 spirit weapon I refine is much stronger than this hammer. Duan Lingtian looked at Zhang Shouyang, who was interested in the giant hammer, and spoke to him via a voice transmission of Yuan Li. Whether it was Huang Danyu or Zhang Shouyang, they were both his friends, and he didn't want to show favoritism. Upon hearing Duan Lingtian's words, Zhang Shouyang's pupils slightly constricted, and then he asked with some shock via a voice transmission of Yuan Li, Brother Lingtian, you can refine Grade 1 spirit weapons now? He naturally knew what refining Grade 1 spirit weapons meant. It meant that Duan Lingtian was now a Grade 1 artifact forger. A Grade 1 artifact forger, let alone a third-rate force like the Blade and Sword sect, where he was currently. Not even those second-rate forces had one. Even first-rate forces might not have a Grade 1 artifact forger. Thus, the esteemed status of a Grade 1 artifact forger on the Cloud Continent was imaginable. Duan Lingtian nodded. The Grade 1 spirit weapon you refined for me? Can it be stronger than the hammer in Danu's hand? Zhang. Shouyang's breathing became a little rapid, and he couldn't help but ask via a voice transmission of Yuan Li. That broken hammer? Duan Lingtian smiled bitterly and shook his head. Was Brother Zhang underestimating him too much? Broken? Hammer? Duan Lingtian's words made Zhang Shouyang freeze for a moment. When he reacted, the corner of his mouth twitched. That was a Grade 1 spirit weapon? In the mouth of his brother Lingtian, it became a broken hammer. Even if he wanted to hit someone, he shouldn't hit them like this, right? It's just a Grade 1 spirit weapon that boosts 88% power. What else could it be, if not a broken hammer? Duan Lingtian said, as if it were a matter of course. You mean you can refine a Grade 1 spirit weapon with a boost exceeding 88%? Zhang Shouyang's eyes lit up, and his breathing became even more rapid for a moment. If I can't refine a Grade 1 spirit weapon that can boost 90% power, I wouldn't even have the nerve to call myself a Grade 1 artifact forger. Duan Lingtian continued to speak via a voice transmission of Yuan Li. Boost 90%? Zhang Shouyang was stunned, completely stunned. Although the Grade 3 spirit weapon wine gourd in his hand was the Grade 3 spirit weapon that Duan Lingtian had refined back then, which could boost 70% power, making it the finest among the finest Grade 3 spirit weapons. At that time, he was already shocked by how strong the boost of the Grade 3 spirit weapon refined by Duan Lingtian was. But he never expected that the current Duan Lingtian could actually refine a Grade 1 spirit weapon that could boost 90% power. Such a Grade 1 spirit weapon could also be called the finest among the finest Grade 1 spirit weapons. However, seeing the confidence in Duan Lingtian's eyes, Zhang Shouyang didn't doubt his words in the slightest. After a hearty laugh, he no longer looked at the giant hammer in Huang Danyu's hand. In his opinion, that giant hammer was nothing more than trash, not worth mentioning compared to the Grade 1 spirit weapon wine gourd he was about to receive. Suli looked at Duan Lingtian, a deep bitterness on his lips. This man he had known since he was 18 had grown to such a degree today. Originally, in his opinion, his ability to emerge from a small kingdom in the Han dynasty and achieve what he had today was already considered heaven-defying, but compared to the purple-clothed youth in front of him, his achievements were simply not worth mentioning. Let's go. Duan Lingtian raised an eyebrow, called out to the three of them, and continued on their way towards the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The four figures moved incredibly fast, as if transforming into 4 streaks of lightning, disappearing behind an exit of the cave in a blink of an eye. Not long after Duan Lingtian and the others left, 3 more swift figures passed through this cave, heading straight for the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure. They clearly, like Duan Lingtian and the others, were preparing to go to the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure as the 3 passed. Through this cave, they seemed to notice something. And one by one they stopped, revealing their true faces. They were three young men who looked to be around 35 years old. That is, a moment later, the three young men discovered the corpse embedded in the side wall of the cave, and their pupils all constricted. To forcefully embed a person's corpse into such a thick cave wall, that person's strength must be at least comparable to that of 1,000 ancient horned dragons, one of the young men said with a shocked expression. The other two young men also looked serious upon hearing this. Soon, another young man murmured in shock, even among our Truyun sect, and the most outstanding young powerhouses of the contemporary, younger generation of the Wuchang sect and the Beiming sect. Even with spirit weapons, there are probably no more than 10 people who can possess such strength, right? From what this young man said, he and the two young men beside him were clearly disciples of the Chu Yun sect, a second-rate force in the northern desert. This person looks a bit familiar. The last young man's gaze fell on the corpse of the black-clothed young man embedded in the cave wall. Soon, he raised his eyebrows, always feeling that this black-clothed young man looked somewhat familiar. Do you know him? For a moment, the other two young men looked at the speaker, their faces full of curiosity. Soon, the person who felt that the black-clothed young man embedded in the cave wall looked somewhat familiar, approached the black-clothed young man's corpse embedded in the cave wall step by step with curiosity. The closer he got, the more familiar the black-clothed young man in front of him felt. Seeing this, the other two also followed the young man, approaching the cave wall step by step, looking at the corpse of the black-clothed young man hanging on the cave wall like a mural. After seeing the face of the corpse clearly, the leading young man's pupils couldn't help but constrict. This is Leng Ji. Soon the young man's expression changed, his eyes filled with an unbelievable glint, as if he had seen something that made him incredibly shocked. What did you say? Leng Ji? You said he's Leng Ji? The Izumo sect disciple, who recognized the black-clad young man embedded in the wall, exclaimed. His words made the other two Izumo sect disciples' pupils contract. One of them was the first to ask in shock. You couldn't have mistaken him, could you? Leng Ji, how could Leng Ji be killed? Leng Ji is someone who can rank in the top 6 among the strongest young generation experts of the 3 second-rate forces in our northern desert land. The other person also looked incredulous. I couldn't have mistaken him. I once met this Leng Ji. He might not recognize me, but I recognize him. The Izumo sect disciple who recognized Leng Ji said, shaking his head with certainty. Seeing how certain this Izumo sect disciple was, the other Izumo sect disciple who had suspected he was mistaken completely dispelled his doubts. He couldn't help but frown and murmured, among those who entered the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure this time, I'm afraid only our Izumo sect's senior brother Mo, and those two from the Wuchang sect and the Beiming sect have the ability to kill him. That person from the Beiming sect is from the same sect as Leng Ji, so it's impossible for him to kill him. Could it be senior brother Mo, or that person from the Wuchang sect who killed Leng Ji? The Izumo sect disciple's eyes flashed as he speculated towards the end of his sentence. And that's the only possibility. Besides senior brother Mo and that person from the Wuchang sect, I can't think of anyone who could kill Leng Ji. The last Izumo sect disciple agreed. After all, even our Izumo sect's second strongest young generation expert, senior brother Lei Jun, and the Wuchang sect's second strongest young generation expert, Peng Bao, wouldn't be a match for Leng Ji, who comprehended Earth intent in a place where one can freely borrow Earth's power. I never thought that Leng Ji, the second strongest young generation expert of the Beiming sect, would die here like this. The Izumo sect disciple who recognized Leng Ji couldn't help but sigh, deeply feeling the fragility of life. Duan Lingtian, who was currently heading to the central area of the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure with Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyang, naturally didn't know that 2 scapegoats were taking the blame for him. I wonder how Shen Wei is doing now. Huang Danyu, who was traveling with Duan Lingtian and the other 2, frowned slightly and said with some worry, Shen Wei? Hearing Huang Danyu's words, Duan Lingtian couldn't help but sigh, then murmured, He is already dead. What? Although Duan Lingtian's voice wasn't loud, Huang Danyu still heard it, and his face instantly changed dramatically. Duan Lingtian, are you telling the truth? Yes, Duan Lingtian nodded, then recounted in detail how he had found Shen Wei's body and buried him, holding nothing back. Damn it! Huang Danyu's face turned ashen, his eyes filled with bloodshot fury, and he couldn't help but clench his fist and roar, If I find out who killed Shen Wei, I, Huang Danyu, will never let him go. His friendship with Shen Wei was even deeper than Duan Lingtian's friendship with Shen Wei. When Duan Lingtian first saw Shen Wei's body, he couldn't help but get angry, let alone the hot-tempered Huang Danyu, whose anger naturally surged. Duan. Ling Tian sighed, shaking his head. He knew in his heart that finding the murderer of Shen Wei was almost impossible. Not to mention whether that person was still alive, even if they were. If the other party didn't voluntarily mention it, they would have no way of knowing who killed Shen Wei. Duan Ling Tian and the other three continued their journey, getting closer and closer to the central area of the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure. Brother Ling Tian. A few days later, as Duan Ling Tian and the other three had just entered a spacious cave, they heard a voice filled with surprise coming from the other end of the cave. Hearing the voice, Duan Ling Tian felt it was somewhat familiar, but he couldn't recall where he had heard it for a moment. When he turned his head and saw one of the two young men approaching from a distance, his eyes lit up. Peng Bao. The person calling him was none other than Peng Bao, the Wucheng sect disciple he had once met. Although he had only made one transaction with Peng Bao at that time, the frankness Peng Bao inadvertently revealed had made him develop a liking for him from the bottom of his heart. Soon, the smile on Duan Ling Tian's face froze again. This was because, at this moment, he noticed that the burly young man beside Peng Bao was staring at him menacingly. Deep in the burly young man's eyes, there was clearly a hint of greed. For a moment, Duan Ling Tian vaguely guessed something. He probably heard the news that others had deliberately spread to frame him, the news that he had obtained a profundity fragment. Otherwise, he and the other party were meeting for the first time, and the other party couldn't possibly look at him with such eyes. Since the burly young man knew, Peng Bao probably knew as well. Duan Ling Tian's gaze fell on Peng Bao again, intentionally focusing on how Peng Bao looked at him, only to find that Peng Bao's gaze held no ill will. It seems I didn't misjudge. Him, after all, Duan Ling Tian thought to himself, his heart stirring. Peng Bao might have also heard about him obtaining the profundity fragment, but he hadn't developed any greed because of it, which was extremely rare. Brother Ling. Tian, I never thought we'd meet here. Who are these three? Peng Bao greeted Duan Ling Tian while looking at Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyong, who were standing beside Duan Ling Tian. They are my friends. Duan Ling Tian smiled faintly. Peng Bao nodded and smiled kindly at the three of them. He didn't show any sense of superiority just because he was a disciple of a second-rate force, the Izumo sect, which made Huang Danyu and the other two feel much more comfortable. And this is? Duan Ling Tian's gaze fell on the burly young man beside Peng Bao again, his eyes flashing as he asked Peng Bao. The spiritual energy he had just extended told him that this burly young man, like Peng Bao and the black-clad young man he had recently killed, was a third-level void transformation stage existence. The Wucheng sect truly has hidden talents. Besides Peng Bao, there's actually another disciple no less capable than Peng Bao. Duan Ling Tian couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Soon, Duan Ling Tian realized he had misunderstood. Brother Ling Tian, this is Lei Jun from the Izumo sect, and he is also the second strongest young generation expert of the Izumo sect. Peng Bao smiled as he introduced Lei Jun to Duan Ling Tian, Izumo sect disciple. Hearing Peng Bao's introduction of Lei Jun, Duan Ling Tian knew he had guessed wrong. This burly young man was not a Wucheng sect disciple, but an Izumo sect disciple. Seeing Peng Bao introduce Lei Jun to him, although Duan Ling Tian didn't particularly want to deal with Lei Jun, he still politely smiled at Lei Jun out of respect for Peng Bao, considering it a greeting. However, the smile on his face quickly froze again. This was because, facing the smile on his face, Lei Jun completely ignored it, as if he hadn't seen it at all. This made Duan Ling Tian feel a surge of displeasure. Brother Ling Tian! Just then, a clear voice reached Duan Ling Tian's ears. He could tell it was Peng Bao's elemental energy condensed sound transmission to him. Hearing the sound, Duan Ling Tian immediately looked at Peng Bao, a hint of confusion appearing on his face, completely unaware of why Peng Bao had suddenly used elemental energy condensed sound transmission to him. Brother Ling Tian, I heard. You obtained a profundity fragment? Peng Bao's voice continued to enter Duan Ling Tian's ears, with a hint of urgency. Profundity fragment? Hearing Peng Bao's words, Duan Ling Tian couldn't help but frown. His first thought was that Peng Bao also believed the rumor that framed him and had developed greed for the profundity fragment in his possession. Soon, Duan Ling Tian realized he had misunderstood Peng Bao. Brother Ling Tian, don't misunderstand. Seeing Duan Ling Tian frown, Peng Bao seemed to guess Duan Ling Tian's thoughts and quickly explained with elemental energy condensed sound transmission. I just want to know what kind of profundity fragment you obtained. I happen to have an 8th level Imperial Realm Thunder Profundity Fragment in my possession, which our Wucheng sect's high-ranking members can't use. I was thinking, if the Profundity Fragment in your hand is something our Wucheng sect's high-ranking members can use, perhaps we could make another trade. Peng Bao quickly stated his intentions. A trade? When Peng Bao mentioned the Aris Turdero 8th level Imperial Realm Thunder Profundity Fragment, Duan Ling Tian's pupils couldn't help but contract. and the depths of his eyes were filled with extreme longing. When Peng Bao finished speaking, he immediately became interested. I currently have 5 profundity fragments in my possession. However, the 7th level Imperial Realm Earth profundity fragment and the 8th level Imperial Realm Wind profundity fragment definitely cannot be exchanged with him, Duan Lingtian thought to himself. If so, only the 3 profundity fragments I obtained from the Sword Emperor's treasure vault are left. Those 3 profundity fragments are all 3rd level Imperial Realm profundity fragments. Perhaps I can try to exchange the 3rd level Imperial Realm Wind profundity fragment with him. As long as he is willing, I will obtain the 8th level Imperial Realm Thunder profundity fragment in his hand. At that time, the 3rd level Imperial Realm Thunder profundity fragment in my hand would be dispensable and could be handed over to the sect. In that instant, Duan Lingtian thought of many things. After regaining his composure, Duan Lingtian immediately looked at Peng Bao and said, via elemental energy condensed sound transmission, "I'm just afraid you won't agree to the exchange. The profundity fragment I obtained is only a 3rd level Imperial Realm profundity fragment." 3rd level Imperial Realm profundity fragment? Indeed, after hearing Duan Lingtian's words, Peng Bao couldn't help but frown. The difference between a 3rd level Imperial Realm profundity fragment and an 8th level Imperial Realm profundity fragment is not an ordinary one for Martial Emperor Realm martial artists. However, for Peak Void Realm martial artists who want to break through to the Martial Emperor Realm with the help of profundity fragments, these 2 types of profundity fragments are not too different. Seeing Peng Bao frown, Duan Ling Tian's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. Although he was confident he could kill Peng Bao and seize the 8th level Emperor Stage Thunder Concept fragment in Peng Bao's hand, he had never considered doing so. Previously, when he and Peng Bao first met, he knew that if he didn't use a talisman, he might not be Peng Bao's match. And in Peng Bao's eyes at the time, he was just an ordinary disciple of a third-rate force, and it would have been easy to kill him and forcefully take the concept fragment from him. But Peng Bao didn't do that. Instead, he exchanged concept fragments with him in an honorable manner. Because of this, he had a good impression of Peng Bao. Now that it was his turn, he naturally couldn't show favoritism and make a move against Peng Bao, although he admitted that he wasn't a good person and wouldn't feel any guilt, even if he took a treasure from someone he didn't know. But he was facing Peng Bao, the same Peng Bao who hadn't forcefully taken his concept fragment, just because he was a disciple of a third-rate force. Peng Bao, of course, was unaware of Duan Lingtian's current thoughts. If he knew Duan Lingtian's current strength and his thoughts at that moment, he would definitely feel extremely fortunate to have escaped a calamity. What kind of concept fragment is that concept fragment in your hand? Just as Duan Lingtian was feeling a little uneasy, Peng Bao's voice entered his ears, extremely clear. Immediately, Duan Lingtian's eyes lit up. He knew that Peng Bao had become interested in the concept fragment in his hand. Wind concept. Fragment. Duan Lingtian stared at Peng Bao, his voice condensed with elemental energy, speaking each word clearly. Soon, he saw the joy flash in Peng Bao's eyes. This scene made his heart pound, and he couldn't help but exclaim inwardly, "There's a chance." As joy flashed in Peng Bao's eyes, he couldn't help but feel a little conflicted. The 8th level Emperor Stage Thunder concept fragment in his hand, in terms of true value, was undoubtedly much higher than the 3rd level Emperor Stage Wind concept fragment in Duan Lingtian's hand. It was just that no high-ranking member of their Wuchang sect could use the Thunder concept fragment, because none of the high-ranking members of their Wuchang sect had comprehended the 9th level Advanced Thunder concept. Only a martial artist who had comprehended the 9th level Advanced Thunder concept could use the Thunder concept fragment to comprehend the Thunder concept and open the door to the Martial Emperor stage. However, the Wind concept fragment could be used by the second strongest person in their Wuchang sect, the sect master of Wuchang sect, who was also his master. Once I obtain the Wind concept fragment in Duan Lingtian's hand, Master will definitely be able to break through to the Martial Emperor stage in one go, becoming the second Martial Emperor expert in our Wuchang sect. Thinking of this, Peng Bao's mood surged with excitement. However, while excited, he also thought of the grade of the Emperor Stage Wind concept fragment in Duan Lingtian's hand. Unconsciously, a bitter smile appeared on his lips. Finally, Peng Bao made a decision. Exchange. The 8th level Emperor Stage Thunder concept fragment in his hand, if placed outside, would naturally be much more valuable than the 3rd level Emperor Stage Wind concept fragment in Duan Lingtian's hand. But the problem was, even if he brought the 8th level Emperor Stage Thunder concept fragment in his hand back to the Wuchang sect, it would be impossible for the Wuchang sect to produce a Martial Emperor expert in a short period of time. It would be a long time before the Wuchang sect would have a 9th level void transformation martial artist who had comprehended the 9th level advanced thunder concept and could comprehend the thunder concept with the help of the thunder concept. Fragment for the current Wuchang sect, the value of the 3rd level Emperor stage, wind concept fragment, was far greater than the value of the 8th level Emperor stage thunder concept fragment. Brother Ling Tian, I want to exchange the 8th level Emperor stage thunder concept fragment in my hand for the 3rd level Emperor stage wind concept fragment in your hand. Are you willing? Peng Bao looked at Duan Ling Tian, his eyes filled with longing, and asked, his voice condensed with elemental energy. Duan Ling Tian didn't speak. He raised his hand like lightning, and a fragment shimmering with azure elemental. Energy shot out from his hand, heading straight for Peng Bao. He answered Peng Bao's question with the most direct action. Peng Bao didn't expect Duan Ling Tian to be so straightforward and trusting, casually throwing the 3rd level Emperor stage wind concept fragment to him. Didn't he worry that he would embezzle this concept fragment? Of course, although Peng Bao thought this, his movements were not slow. While catching the wind concept fragment, he also took out a fragment shimmering with purple elemental energy and threw it to Duan Ling Tian. It was precisely the 8th level Emperor stage thunder concept fragment he had obtained. Clap, Duan. Ling Tian acted like lightning, catching the thunder concept fragment and gripping it tightly in his hand. I've hit the jackpot. At this moment, although Duan Ling Tian's face remained as calm as possible, his heart was surging with excitement, exchanging a 3rd level Emperor stage concept fragment for an 8th level Emperor stage concept fragment. If this matter were to spread, who knows how many jaws would drop? Duan Ling Tian and Peng Bao exchanged concept fragments very quickly. Everything happened like lightning, so much so that even Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyang didn't clearly see their movements. However, besides the 2 of them and the 3 of Huang Danyu, there was another person present. Lei Jun, the second strongest among the current generation of young experts in the Wuchang sect, Duan Ling Tian and Peng Bao's actions were observed by Lei Jun from beginning to end, especially when Duan Ling Tian and Peng Bao exchanged concept fragments. His gaze towards Duan Ling Tian became even more greedy. If not for his apprehension of Peng Bao, he would have already made a move. Duan Ling Tian naturally saw Lei Jun's gaze, but he didn't pay it any mind. His thoughts were entirely on the 8th level Emperor stage thunder concept fragment in his hand. With a thought, he carefully put it into his spatial ring as if it were a priceless treasure. Now, all 3 natural concepts I have comprehended have corresponding high-level Emperor stage concept fragments. As long as I comprehend them to the 9th level advanced, I can use those 3 concept fragments to further transform them into Emperor stage concepts. Thinking of this, Duan Ling Tian's heart surged with excitement. Even if there was only 1 concept fragment he could use, it meant he was 1 step closer to the martial Emperor stage. And now, for the 4 concepts he had comprehended, he had corresponding concept fragments in his hand. 7th level Emperor stage, Earth concept fragment. 8th level Emperor stage, Wind concept fragment. 8th level Emperor stage, Thunder concept fragment. 3rd level Emperor stage, Sword concept fragment. As for that 3rd level Emperor stage Thunder concept fragment, I will hand it over to the sect. Duan Ling Tian secretly planned. Originally, after he killed the black-clad young man, who was suspected to be a disciple of the Beiming sect, and obtained the 8th level Emperor stage Wind concept fragment from him, he had intended to hand over the 3rd level Emperor stage Wind concept fragment to the sect. But who would have thought that his encounter with Peng Bao would bring him another opportunity? He exchanged a 3rd level Emperor stage Wind concept fragment for the 8th level Emperor stage Thunder concept fragment in Peng Bao's hand, making a highly profitable deal. The 3rd level Emperor stage Wind concept fragment. Having gone to Peng Bao, it was naturally impossible to hand it over to the sect anymore. Thus, he could only hand over another concept fragment. Coincidentally, he had obtained the 8th level Emperor stage Thunder concept fragment from Peng Bao, making the other 3rd level Emperor stage Thunder concept fragment in his hand dispensable, and it could be handed over to the sect. There are only 5 concept fragments in total in the outer area of this martial Emperor's hidden treasure. Now 3 of them are in my hands. I wonder who obtained the other 2. Duan Ling Tian's eyes flashed, and he couldn't help but feel a little curious. Brother Ling Tian, you should also be heading to the central area of the martial Emperor's hidden treasure, right? Suddenly, a voice came to Duan Ling Tian's ears. When he came back to his senses and looked towards where the voice came from, he found Peng Bao looking at him with a faint smile. Duan Ling Tian nodded. Since that's the case, let's travel together then. I'm also going there, Peng Bao suggested. All right. Duanling Tian agreed. However, Lei Jun, who was standing by, heard Peng Bao's words, and his expression turned extremely ugly. Peng Bao doing this was nothing more than an attempt to protect Duanling Tian and prevent him from snatching the concept. Fragment in Duanling Tian's hand. Peng Bao, since you have already obtained what you wanted, there is no need for us to continue cooperating. A fierce glint flashed in Lei Jun's eyes. After his gaze lingered on Peng Bao for a moment, it then focused on Duanling Tian, filled with chilling, killing intent, as if he couldn't wait to kill Duanling Tian. Whoosh! As soon as his voice fell, Lei Jun dashed out, heading straight for the central area of the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure, disappearing from the sight of Duanling Tian and the other four in a flash. Peng Bao didn't care about Lei Jun's departure. Duanling Tian cared even less. After greeting Huang Danyu and the other two, he and Peng Bao set off together for the central area of the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure. That would also be their destination for this trip. Of course, it was not the final destination. After going to the central area of the Martial Emperor's hidden treasure and searching and competing for treasures with other young experts until the end, if they could survive, everyone would have to exit through the cave entrance they came in from. Whoosh! 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 The five moved very quickly, getting closer and closer to the central area. Peng Bao, since you are a disciple of the Wucheng sect, you must be quite familiar with some of the disciples of the Beiming sect, right? On the way, Duanling Tian curiously asked Peng Bao. As for Beiming sect disciples, I only know the more outstanding ones. Peng Bao said, Why are you suddenly asking this? Do you have a friend in the Beiming sect? No, Duanling Tian shook his head and casually said, I was just asking, is there a young expert in the Beiming sect who has comprehended the third-level advanced earth concept and whose cultivation has reached the third-level void transformation stage? Are you talking about Leng Ji? As soon as Duanling Tian finished speaking, Peng Bao couldn't help but be stunned. Leng Ji? Duanling Tian raised an eyebrow, the image of the black-clothed youth he had recently killed flashing in his mind. It seems he truly was a disciple of the Northern Underworld sect. Peng Bao nodded. Among the current generation of young disciples in the Northern Underworld sect, only Leng Ji has comprehended the triple-layered advanced earth concept and is also a third-level void transformation martial artist. He is the only one. Leng Ji is the second strongest among the current generation of young disciples in the Northern Underworld sect. His strength is extraordinary. If we were to fight high in the sky, we would be evenly matched. But if I were to encounter him in this Martial Emperor's secret treasure, I would be inferior to him. As he spoke, Peng Bao's tone grew a few shades more wary. Duanling Tian nodded, naturally understanding why Peng Bao would say such a thing. The Martial Emperor's secret treasure is composed of caverns hidden deep underground, and every corner allows martial artists who have comprehended the Earth concept to freely communicate with the Earth and borrow Earth's power. So that guy was called Leng Ji. At this moment, Huang Danyu, who was beside them, nodded in sudden realization, then couldn't help but sneer. So what if he's the second strongest among the current generation of young disciples in a second-rate force like the Northern Underworld sect? Didn't Duanling Tian still take him down? As he spoke, a hint of smugness appeared on Huang Danyu's face, as if it wasn't Duanling Tian who had taken down Leng Ji, but him. Duanling Tian, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyong had no reaction to Huang Danyu's words, but when they reached Peng Bao's ears, they struck him like a bolt of lightning, causing him to freeze in place, no longer flying forward. Seeing Peng Bao stop, Duanling Tian and the other three also stopped. Brother Ling Tian, you killed Leng Ji? Peng Bao looked at Duanling Tian, his pupils wide with shock and disbelief. Although, when he learned that Duanling Tian had obtained a concept fragment, he had vaguely guessed that Ling Tian's strength was not simple, far stronger than he had imagined. But he never would have thought that Duanling Tian would actually have the ability to kill Leng Ji. Leng Ji's cultivation and concept were on par with his, but if he were to fight Leng Ji in the Martial Emperor's secret treasure, he would almost certainly lose. Leng Ji had comprehended the Earth concept, allowing him to freely borrow Earth's power in the Martial Emperor's secret treasure, which could increase the power of his Earth concept by half. Facing Peng Bao's question, Duanling Tian simply nodded, his expression calm and composed, as if killing Leng Ji was nothing to him. Of course, it truly was nothing. If he had chosen to strike first, unleashing his full power, directly exhibiting a strength that was more than 200 ancient horned dragons stronger than Leng Ji's, he could have taken down Leng Ji in just one encounter. Monster! Seeing Duanling Tian merely nod casually in response to his question, Peng Bao's mouth twitched violently, and this thought immediately popped into his mind. A third-rate force, the Five-Element sect, had actually produced such a terrifying disciple, causing a strange shock to well up from the depths of his heart. The purple-clad youth before him, no matter how he looked at him, appeared to be only around 25 years old, even if his profound cultivation could suppress aging, and he paid it. Attention to maintenance, his true age would not exceed 30. Peng Bao was certain of this. It was precisely because of this that he felt such inexplicable shock, even disbelief. Let's go. At Duanling Tian's call, Peng Bao continued to travel with Duanling Tian and the other four, heading towards the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure. However, along the way, he kept glancing at Duanling Tian. This young man, who could be called a peerless evildoer, was able to take down Ling Ji, who had borrowed Earth's power. How powerful must his strength be? Fortunately, I never thought of snatching the 9-layered blade concept fragment from him back then. Otherwise, I would definitely be the one dead, not him. Thinking back to his first meeting with Duanling Tian and their transaction, Peng Bao couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. He still remembered that transaction clearly. He had exchanged a 9-layered Earth concept fragment for Duanling Tian's 9-layered blade concept fragment. At that time, in his eyes, Duanling Tian was just a greenhorn from a third-rate force, weak and insignificant. Thinking about how he had even instructed Duanling Tian when he left, his face couldn't help but flush with embarrassment. And this time, fortunately, I didn't covet the triple-layered Royal Wind concept fragment in Brother Ling Tian's hands. Otherwise, let alone securing the concept fragment for the sect, whether I could even survive would be a problem. At this thought, Peng Bao felt another wave of lingering fear. I was even worried that Lei Jun would covet the concept fragment in Brother Ling Tian's hands and attack him. Lei Jun's strength is on par with mine, but in this, martial. Emperor's secret treasure. He is still inferior to Ling Ji. Peng Bao laughed self-deprecatingly, feeling that he had previously underestimated Duanling Tian too much. Brother Ling Tian can even kill Ling Ji. If Lei Jun dares to provoke Brother Ling Tian, there's no suspense. He's definitely dead. Duanling Tian naturally did not know Peng Bao's thoughts. Currently, he was fully focused on the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure they were about to reach. For him, it was an unknown place. The unknown is also the most terrifying, because anything can happen there. According to the message left by that Martial Emperor expert, there's a palace in the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure he left behind. That is precisely where he breathed his last. Duanling Tian recalled the information he had obtained from the Martial Emperor expert's message after entering the Martial Emperor's secret treasure. It definitely won't be that simple to obtain the 3 concept fragments from his body in that palace. Duanling Tian had a very strong intuition about this. Of course, the reason he had this intuition was because of the memories of the reincarnated Martial Emperor he had fused with. According to the reincarnated Martial Emperor's thought process, if a Martial Emperor expert truly left behind his final resting place and his Emperor concept fragments, he would never let anyone obtain them easily. In the eyes of a Martial Emperor expert, only the most outstanding individuals were qualified to obtain his Emperor concept fragments. 3 days later, Duanling Tian stopped, and the other 4 beside him also stopped, standing beside him, because they found that there was no more road ahead. They were now in a spacious cavern. There were 3 cave entrances on each of the left and right sides of the cavern, leading to other caverns, and they were confused, not knowing which cave entrance was the way to the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure. Should we split up and scout ahead? Huang Danyo was the first to suggest. That's the only way? Duanling Tian nodded, his gaze then falling on the innermost cave entrance on the left side. I'll go that way. Peng Bao, you go that way. Immediately after, Duanling Tian looked at the innermost cave entrance on the right side and said to Peng Bao. Peng Bao nodded, having no objections. Dan Yu, Su Li, Brother Zhang, the 3 of you go together and enter any cave entrance to investigate. Regardless of the outcome, we will regroup here after 1 day. Following that, Duanling Tian looked at Huang Danyu, Su Li, and Zhang Shouyang. The 3 of them were the weakest among their group of 5, and considering their safety, Duanling Tian had them go together. Okay, Huang Danyu and the other 2 quickly responded. Duanling Tian nodded to the 4 of them, then transformed into a purple lightning bolt, sweeping into the innermost cave entrance on the left side of the cavern, flying rapidly inside, intending to investigate the situation within Peng Bao, then flew out and entered the innermost cave entrance on the right side of the cavern. Huang Danyu and the other 2 also entered a cave entrance. Just as the 3 of them had set off, a figure suddenly appeared before one of the outer cave entrances, a burly figure. Peng Bao, this time, let's see how you protect that Duanling Tian. The owner of the burly figure was none other than Lei Jun. Ever since he had separated from Duanling Tian and the other 4 that day, he had traveled alone to the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure, and had arrived here. After arriving here, relying on the speed driven by the power of 1,000 ancient horned dragons, He quickly discovered the correct path to the central area. The correct path was behind the innermost cave entrance on the right side of the cavern. That cave entrance was also the one Peng Bao had gone to investigate. After confirming the correct path to the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure, he was about to continue his journey when a thought flashed in his mind, realizing that this might be an opportunity for him, an opportunity to kill Duanling Tian, and obtain the concept fragment in Duanling Tian's hands, 8-layered royal thunder concept fragment. Lei Jun's eyes flashed with an incredibly greedy glint. Then his entire body moved, purple lightning crackling around him as he swiftly flew out, disappearing into the innermost cave entrance on the left side of the cavern. His target was precisely Duanling Tian. To be precise, it was the 8-layered royal thunder concept fragment in Duanling Tian's hands. Duanling Tian naturally did not know that Lei Jun was lurking here, nor did he know that Lei Jun was now chasing after him. Whoosh! After Duanling Tian entered the innermost cave on the left side, his elemental energy fully erupted, and 4 concepts followed him like shadows, making him appear as if he had transformed into a great sword enveloped by earthy yellow. Power, purple lightning, and cyan gales. Swish! The great sword sliced through the air, traversing through one cavern after another, intending to investigate whether this was the way to the central area of the Martial Emperor's secret treasure. Time quietly flowed by. Half a day passed quickly. At this moment, Duanling Tian had also thoroughly understood the situation here. This was a dead maze from which there was no exit, only a way back. Let's go back first. Perhaps they have clues over there. With a thought, Duanling Tian began to walk back. Just as he was about to approach the cave entrance he had come through, Duanling Tian's swift figure stopped, his eyes gleaming with coldness, fixed on the burly young man not far away. Lei Jun!